Alright, so after the Battle of Sedan in 1870, the French Empire had collapsed. The German Confederation Army, including all the German states except for Austria, were marching towards Paris. A large force was marching towards Paris. Now, what they did was they encircled Paris because the remaining forces were in Paris, or a large majority of them were in Paris. So what ended up happening was they had to make a decision. A lot of the militaristic people, the military wing of the government in Prussia, were saying that the city should be shelled. Now, many high-ranking officials disagreed with that, saying it was barbaric and inhuman to shell the city. And additionally, a lot of people were worried about the political side, because a lot of the previous people and nations that were supporting the Germans were now turning against them. A lot of Italians that had supported the destruction of the French Empire were now terrified about the Germans defeating the French. So a lot of them were changing their minds in Italy about the Germans. Additionally, a lot of other nations were worried because they were worried the Germans would be too harsh on the French in the treaties. So what ended up happening was the Germans ended up advancing to Paris. Encircled. So a new plan came up with a couple of great minds. What they said was they were going to blockade the city. I will just give you a couple more details. The Prussian forces commenced the siege of Paris on the 19th of September 1817. Faced with blockade, the new French government called for the establishment of several large armies in the French provinces. Now, what ended up happening was, after it was literally a coup d'etat of the royal government of France. So the government of national defence was established. Now, what ended up happening was they sent one of their ministers by hot air balloon. Minister Leon Gambetta, in a hot air balloon. I know this is amazing. I wouldn't have thought they would have done this, but they did. Oh crap, it's a red balloon. You don't want It's the Clan coming after you. Red balloon, but so what was it, Mr. Gambetta? Leon Gambetta flew around the south, near Orleans. I believe they then established an army with five new armies that totaled 500,000 new troops for France. However, these were separated all over the French countryside, but I'm only focusing on the battles near Paris. There were a whole lot of other battles, but in all honesty, the Republican armies weren't that strong because they were brand new armies that they were literally created and scratched on a moment's notice. In New Orleans, the new French army defeated the Bavarian army. So they took control of the city and destroyed the Prussian army. Just make sure the camera's on. Yeah, that's on. So they destroyed the Bavarian army, so the Bavarian army had to retreat. However, German Confederation troops backed the Bavarians up and took, with a lot bigger force of the the French then had to retreat to Le Mans. At Le Mans, the Prussians ended up defeating the French, taking the city. Then the remaining forces went to Saint-Quest-Arez, north of Paris. The Prussians ended up defeating them as well, taking the city as well. Now, there were a whole lot of small battles all around the French countryside with this new 500,000 force, but it was quite futile. It was not worth much. The French were beaten. So eventually the French government collapsed, or the government of national defense collapsed. What ended up? Just wait. So on the 26th of January 1871, the government of national defense base in Paris negotiated an armistice with the Prussians, with Paris starving and Gambetta's provincial armies reeling from one disaster after another. What was it? We'll just... Okay. So, the terms of the treaty was called the Treaty of Versailles. Versailles, if you don't know, was the palace of the French royal family and the head of the French government. It was the Parliament of Government for France for nearly for a very long time, when the French monarchs ruled the Kingdom of France before the French Revolution in the late 1700s. So what ended up happening at Versailles? Versailles was virtually the heart of French life. So it was a very important building. The Bonapartes had used it and lived there as well for a little while. Subsequent governments had also been there as well. So what ended up happening was, in the war, the Prussians and the German Confederation ended up using one of the biggest rooms, or one of the great rooms in the palace, called the Hall of Mirrors. The Hall of Mirrors is this beautiful, massive room that's got all these mirrors and it's got all these decorations. I haven't been to France myself, but I've seen a lot of pictures of it and it looks magnificent. But a lot of German wounded were being put there. It was a hospital. I believe the Red Cross were there. I could be wrong about that, but there was a lot of it was used as a medical building, a government building as well. And another special event important event for the Germans happened in that building very soon, but we'll get to that. So what ended up happening was the Treaty of Versailles in 1871 occurred. The provisions for the treaty are that the French had to pay 5 billion francs to the Germans. The German army would continue to occupy France until these payments were complete. So the Germans were in France for quite a while until the payment was made. The treaty also recognized Wilhelm I as the German Kaiser, and as well the treaty also started the discussion of the acquisition of Alsace, Lorraine and Moselle and a couple others. Now, I will get to the proclamation of the German Empire. So, Bismarck was a smart guy. He knew how things were going. I'll just draw a picture of Versailles so you understand what was happening. Okay, so since I don't have much time, I can't really draw a proper picture of it. Pretty much the basis of the main painting depicting the declaration of a German Empire is there's King Wilhelm I of Prussia, his senior ministers, and Otto von Bismarck is in the corner of the picture, being independent here. Now that's important because he's seen as, he's very bold in the painting, bolded out in the painting. Now, something that was, there was an argument happening between Bismarck and the, I won't say Kaiser just yet, I'll say King of Prussia, was, the fact was, Wilhelm I wanted to be called Emperor of Germany. Now, to me, it doesn't make quite a lot of difference, but according to the historians, that would have been very problematic. So, what the problem Bismarck had was that the German princes saw that as an inappropriate title. They wanted Wilhelm to be called German Emperor, not Emperor of Germany, because they didn't want to have an autocratic leader that was more, be seen as better than all of them. I personally can't understand it personally, but from the history books, that's part of the reason. There's probably other reasons that I don't know of just yet, but the title apparently was very important. So what ended up happening was, I will just get up the date. On the 18th of January 1871, the German princes and senior military commanders proclaimed Wilhelm German Emperor in the Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles. Under the subsequent Treaty of Frankfurt, France relinquished most of its traditionally German regions, including Alsace-Lorraine, and paid an indemnity calculated on the basis of the population as the previous equivalent indemnity that Napoleon Bonaparte imposed on Prussia in 1807, and accepted German administration of Paris and most northern France, with German troops to withdrawn stage by stage, with each installment of the indemnity paid. So, in fact, actually, when the proclamation happened, Wilhelm was so pissed off at what actually ended up happening was, I think it was one of the princes, Otto had said to Wilhelm, you have to be called German Emperor, not Emperor of Germany. Wilhelm was saying, I want to be called Emperor of Germany. And then I believe one of the princes that had the helmet, the Kaiser helmet or whatever it was, that puts it on top of his head, actually just proclaimed Wilhelm as the German Emperor, so there wouldn't be a problem. However, after he was proclaimed, he shook everyone's hands, I think except for Bismarck, but they ended up being good pals afterwards. It was just a bit of a moment of anger. But so what ended up happening was, this is a very historic moment, because the modern German state is literally created from this moment, when the southern German states acknowledge the German Empire. Now, this is also an important moment for the First World War, the Second World War, the modern German state, everything. A lot of the world events that happened in the 20th and 21st century are linked to this moment in time. Now, I will talk about what happened afterwards and some of the subsequent leaders after the Franco-Prussian War. Now, some of the southern German states were pretty weak and not that big. But one of the biggest ones was Bavaria. Now, Bavaria was a big kingdom, very wealthy, but a lot of the people in Bavaria wanted to be part of the German Empire. They fought. The Bavarian army had fought with the German Confederation. They'd grown this nationalistic a brotherhood with each of the Germans. They were Germans, not Bavarians or Prussians anymore. They were Germans. But a lot of the kings and lords of these small German states weren't satisfied. But the Bavarian king was holding out on this fact. It was holding out so far. But the thing was, Ludwig. I'll just get Ludwig's full name up. He's sometimes called Ludwig the Mad. So Ludwig reigned from 1864 until 1886, but we'll just get where is he? Okay, so he's Ludwig II. Now, Ludwig, if you could call him eccentric, that would probably be an understatement. It is believed he was a bit mad. Now, Ludwig was the oldest son of the King of Bavaria before he died. However, Ludwig was very weak. He was very interested in art. He loved art. He in fact invited anti-monarchists who were artists to stay in Bavaria against his minister's will, who started little revolts against himself. But this was a problem. Now, he wasn't the strongest leader, but he was absolutely obsessed with making castles. He was actually in a lot of debt at the time of the Franco-Prussian War. But I'll just name some of his castles. Oh God, I can't even pronounce. I'll pronounce some of the ones that I can actually pronounce. Lindenhof, Herenses, Munich Redder's Palace Royal Apartment. Now, what ended up happening was, as he was a bit mad and he just wanted to build castles in all honesty, Bismarck knew about this and offered him a substantial amount of money to proclaim Wilhelm I as emperor. So also helped him write the letter, and they paid a substantial amount of money to Ludwig. So that's, from my knowledge, that's how Bavaria became part of the German Empire. There is probably a lot more to it, but since I'm a bit tired, I'll just say that about it. But pretty much, Ludwig I don't think, was all there. But pretty much all the other German states ended up entering the German Empire, and I'll just draw up the map. Alright, so this is pretty much the map of the German Empire after 1871. Lorraine, former German territories that were part of France for many centuries, are now part of Germany. I'm not going to talk about the other wars, but I'm going to bring up some of the things that this unification caused. All the southern German states joined, or most of them joined the German Empire after the Franco-German War, because that brotherhood of nationhood. Schleswig, I can't even pronounce it, but the former Danish territories. So, now I'm going to talk about something else. Now, after the wars, the German Empire started industrializing quite quickly. The late 1800s was a time of modernization for many European superpowers. Patriotism and nationhood became very big, so the Germans were very proud of themselves. They just won virtually every war they'd been in the last couple of decades. They'd beaten their rival, the French. However, this unification caused further problems. My awful. We'll draw a basic map, but the maps isn't going to match up perfectly. I'm just saying that. Luxembourg. Oh, whoops. Dutch. Belgium. And France over here. I believe after the end of the Second French Empire, France became the Third Republic. Alright, so then we've got Switzerland very big. I think we might make Switzerland just slightly smaller. Then Spain and Portugal down here. I know this is not the best map of Europe, but then the Austrian Empire. Alright. Now I'm just going to explain some things that came up for the Germans after German unification. Now, Prime Minister Otto von Bismarck was a very powerful man, no doubt about it. His power was controlled by Wilhelm I, and what was it? Like a bit like a similar system to our system, but definitely more control in their system. Like the monarch had a lot more control in their system. Now, what ended up happening was, because of the defeats of Austria became a lot weaker. Now, as we were talking about, nationalism in Germany made Germany stronger. Nationalism in Austria made Austria weaker. Because the thing was, there were a whole lot of national ethnic groups within Austria. And the North, Polish, Croats, Hungarians, my European geography, but pretty much there was a lot of ethnic groups within the Austrian Empire, as I discussed earlier about Franz Joseph. Now because of the victories the German Empire had, this made Austria weaker. Now, Austria's main ally after all these events had occurred was Russia. Now, Russia was a gigantic country. Now, it still is a gigantic country, but the Russian Empire was huge. So pretty much what ended up happening, the Austrians' main ally in this period was the Russians. Were the Russians. Now, a war occurred called the Crimean War in this time period. Now, I am talking about this to do with the Germans, but I'm just going to mention this as well. The Crimean War occurred because the Ottoman Empire down here was starting to collapse. The Ottomans had been collapsing since about the late 1600s. Their country was just behind the times, and like the Ottomans, they had different ethnic tribal groups absolutely all over the place, and they were an easy target for modern colonizing empires like Britain, France, and Russia. So what ended up happening was the Russians ended up saying, well, what ended up happening was the French wanted to make their relationship with the Catholic Church better. Oh shit, that was before the... Oh Jesus, I've got the timeline mixed up a bit. We won't mention... Actually, we'll mention the Crimean War, but I will just state this because I completely forgot about this. Oh, fuck me. That is bad. Alright, I'll mention this anyway. So the Crimean War actually happened before the Franco-Prussian War. I'm going to check the date just to make sure. I'm pretty sure I'm right. Crimean. Yeah, I'm right. Alright, so the Crimean War ended in 1856, I believe. I could be wrong about that, but it happened before the Franco-Prussian War. Pretty much the French wanted to make their relationship better with the Catholic Church, and by doing that, they demanded wanted the Ottomans to treat the religious rights of the Christians better in the northern, or the Balkans. It was becoming literally a very violent place at that time. So the Russians, who wanted to expand and take back the Orthodox capital that was Constantinople, that is now Istanbul, wanted to take back the Orthodox churches and then eventually Constantinople. So what ended up happening was the Russians ended up sending a force down here to take the Ottomans' land. They ended up being defeated in a battle, and then the Russians ended up defeating the Ottomans in huge naval battles. For some reason, the Austrians then chipped in and shot at the Russians, sending them back to their border. So this was a catastrophe for the Austrians because that was their only real ally. And that was a very bad choice of Franz Joseph at the time. I'm not sure if he was in power at that time, but pretty much this happened before all this, but so I'll get to the point now. This acquisition of Alsace-Lorraine caused a lot of problems for the Germans in the future, because the thing was, they caused huge numbers of French people to literally evacuate from these territories back into France, and it caused a lot of hatred for the Germans, causing this beginning of a rivalry between France and Germany, and an arms race to start. Additionally, this unification caused the old state of Denmark to be weakened. It caused the nation of Italy to become an actual power of Europe. It did lose all the battles, most of the battles against the Austrians, but it won because of the German Empire getting Venice. What else? Just thinking if there's anything else I can mention without mentioning the First World War, but as well, I will mention Bismarck one last time so we can finish this. Complete this. Bismarck wanted to create treaties and deals that kept the peace of Europe. Now, what ended up happening was when Wilhelm I died, his son, who had been through all this, was terminally ill. Now, he had a son. You will know him from the First World War. Wilhelm, just remember what number he is. Alright. Wilhelm II. So Wilhelm II was the grandson of Wilhelm I. Now, Wilhelm II was very young. He was very anti-British. Now, the reason for this was he was born disabled. I'll just check the camera's still on. Good. When he was born, I think his arm was paralysed, or it was born broken. And it was a British doctor. His mother was British, I believe. And I believe when his father was dying, it was a British doctor that was meant to be looking after him, and his father died. Now, Bismarck was meant to look after Wilhelm II, but Wilhelm II didn't really like Bismarck much. He wanted to be his own independent Kaiser. Kaiser means emperor. So, in German, I believe, what means Kaiser in German. So what ended up happening was, I think a year after Wilhelm II became Kaiser of Germany, after he became Kaiser, Bismarck was kicked from power, because only the Kaiser could remove a prime minister. Now, unfortunately, Bismarck knew what happened. I think he even predicted that the German Empire would collapse in 1918 with how things were going with a military build-up. Because while Bismarck had used a lot of military and wars to defeat other nations, his main aim at the end was to create a long-lasting peace between a lot of the European nations. However, a lot of those treaties that he came up with couldn't survive without Bismarck. He wanted to keep peace with the Russians. However, in the late 19th century, that absolutely collapsed. There ended up being absolute hatred between the Germans and the Russians at the late 19th century. In fact, all the monarchs of Europe were literally related to Queen Victoria. That was meant to create a peace, a long-lasting peace between family members. However, this did not work. The Kaiser was absolutely hated by half the monarchs of Europe. Tsar Nicholas II absolutely loathed the Kaiser. King George, very similar. Wasn't a fan of the Kaiser. They thought he was a bit of a weirdo. So it was Germany, after unification, went through a lot of change. Socialism did grow in parts of Germany with the working classes growing, but socialism was banned. Meeting of socialists and socialist newspapers were banned, so arrests of socialists did begin under Bismarck's rule as Prime Minister. Additionally, Catholics, I believe, were treated quite badly under Bismarck, but I could be wrong about that. But because I believe they were a bit worried about the Pope's influence in Germany, especially in the southern states that were very Catholic, unlike the northern states that followed the Lutheran faith under the Protestant faith. So, of the Christian branches, pretty much, if you don't know the difference between Catholicism and Protestantism. But pretty much the unification of Germany was very important. It changed the map of Europe, and it has changed it today. Like we'll just draw up a map of Europe today, and you'll see the similarity between the German Empire and So I've just drawn up a basic map of Europe today. So virtually you can see the majority of the German Empire remains today. The only bits that have really changed from that map I showed before was this area, Alsace-Lorraine. It's not how it's pronounced, but I know it's not how you pronounce it, but I can't pronounce the proper name properly. First World War, the Germans had to return it. And then the Second World War, the Germans took over the entire continent, but then after the Second World War, it was returned to France. What was it? Poland, after the First World War, came into existence. However, the Germans retained East Prussia over here, but then there was a problem between these two territories, and there was a town called Danzig that was very German, very patriotic. So when the Second World War happened, as I said, the Germans took over nearly the entirety of Europe, if not most of a fair chunk of the world. But so literally, I'll just draw an outline of the old German Empire. So pretty much most of Germany is still the same, except for Poland and bits of Czechoslovakia. I would say Poland's pretty much the main difference with the old map. But except for that, virtually everything else is the same. So you can see how German unification was very important for the rest of Europe and Germany. So that finishes up the video on German unification. Took quite a while because of room changes, but very interesting history. Thank you very much for watching.